Some paintings capture light. But there are a few, rare, haunting few, that seem to capture something far beyond it. This is the story of one such painting, and the man who did not believe in the one whose face he was asked to reveal. But before we go any further, I want to ask you something that comes from the heart. Are you willing to receive the blessings that the Virgin Mary has lovingly prepared for you? If your answer is yes, write in the comments, "Yes, I am ready for Mary's miracles." And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. In the gray heart of Portland, Maine, where the fog rolls in from the harbor and hangs like a ghost between the brick buildings, lived Ethan Hale, an artist who once brushed shoulders with greatness but now painted for whoever paid best. His studio smelled of turpentine and loneliness, its walls lined with portraits of the rich, the vain, and the dead. Critics used to call him a prodigy. Now they called him something else, a craftsman without a soul. And perhaps they were right. Ethan painted what he saw, not what he felt, because somewhere along the line, he had stopped feeling anything at all. His faith in beauty, in people, in God, had long withered away. The church bells that rang outside his window each Sunday only reminded him of the funeral where he'd first stopped believing, the day his mother's coffin disappeared beneath the frozen earth, and the priest had spoken of mercy while his heart felt nothing but silence. So, he built his world around reason, not reverence. Around skill, not spirit. And he was proud of it. Then one autumn afternoon, as leaves drifted like rusted coins down the cobblestone streets, the door to his studio opened, and Evelyn Carter stepped inside. She looked out of place in that dim space of paint and shadow, a widow dressed in gray, her hands clutching a small prayer book, her eyes luminous with kindness. "Mr. Hale," she said softly. "I was told you're the finest painter in Portland." Ethan didn't look up from his easel. "Whoever told you that hasn't seen the others." Her smile didn't waver. "I need a portrait," she continued, "but not of myself. I'd like you to paint the Virgin Mary." The brush slipped from his hand. He turned to face her fully for the first time. "The Virgin Mary? You know I'm not a church painter." "I know," she said. "That's why I came to you." He frowned. "You want an unbeliever to paint your saint?" Evelyn's voice didn't rise, it was calm, steady, almost maternal. "I don't need a saint, Mr. Hale. I need a man honest enough to see her." For a moment, the studio fell silent. Outside, the wind moaned against the window panes. Ethan crossed his arms. "And why me?" "Because," she said, her gaze unwavering, "your paintings have the truth of suffering. And Mary knows suffering better than anyone." He should have turned her away. He almost did. But then she set an envelope on the table, advance payment, enough to pay 3 months' rent. He hesitated. Then, with a faint smirk, said, "Fine. I'll paint your Virgin. But don't expect her to glow." Evelyn smiled, not triumphantly, but knowingly. "She already does." When she left, the studio felt colder. Ethan lit a cigarette and stared at the blank canvas, its white surface glaring like a challenge. He muttered to himself, "The Virgin Mary. Of all things." He began sketching, mechanical at first, the soft oval of a face, the curve of a veil, the delicate outline of hands folded in prayer. His strokes were confident, but his heart remained distant. Hours passed. The city darkened. He looked at what he had made and felt nothing. The figure was technically perfect, but lifeless, a shell without breath. He leaned back, exhaling smoke. "You wanted honesty, Mrs. Carter," he whispered bitterly. "Here it is. There's no God in this paint." And yet, even as he spoke the words, something in him stirred. He couldn't shake the memory of her eyes, not sorrowful, not pleading, but full of some strange, steady peace. It unnerved him. He pushed the canvas aside and poured himself a drink. The next day, Evelyn returned. She carried a small bouquet of lilies and placed them beneath the easel without a word. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is this part of the ritual?" "No," she said gently. "It's a prayer. For you." He scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. Save your prayers for someone who believes. I already have, she said quietly, and that's why I'm here. She touched the edge of the canvas, where the unfinished figure of the Virgin stood, pale and hollow. Her eyes are closed, Evelyn said softly. Why? I haven't decided what she's looking at. Perhaps, Evelyn said, she's not looking at something, but for someone. Ethan froze. Before he could reply, she was gone, the sound of her footsteps fading down the narrow stairwell. That night, he sat staring at the canvas long after midnight. The lamp hissed softly, casting the Virgin's shadow across the wall. For reasons he couldn't explain, he began to paint again, not out of inspiration, but compulsion. He worked in silence, the smell of turpentine mixing with the faint sweetness of the lilies. And somewhere in that stillness, a strange unease crept over him. The longer he painted, the more he felt as if he wasn't alone. Once, he thought he heard a whisper behind him, soft, like the rustle of fabric. He spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the cold night air, and the scent of roses. He frowned, muttering, "Roses? There aren't any." But the scent lingered, subtle, impossible, pure. He glanced back at the canvas, and froze. For a heartbeat, under the wavering lamplight, the Virgin's face seemed to glow. Not with paint or technique, but with warmth. He blinked, and it was gone. He sat in stunned silence, the brush still trembling in his hand. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hale prayed, not out of faith, but out of fear. For the next several weeks, the Virgin Mary became Ethan Hale's obsession. He told himself it was just another commission, nothing more. But in truth, he painted like a man trying to prove something, not to his client, not even to himself, but to the silence that had begun to surround him. He worked in long stretches, sometimes from sunrise to the hour when the city's bells tolled midnight. The canvas consumed him. Every layer of color, every stroke of the brush, felt like a challenge, not of technique, but of belief. And though he refused to admit it, he had begun to dream of her, the woman in blue, veiled in light. Sometimes she was weeping. Sometimes she said nothing, only looking at him with eyes so full of compassion that it made him wake up gasping for air. He blamed the stress. The fumes. The client's strange influence. Anything but faith. At the cafe down the street, Ethan's small circle of painter friends had started to notice the change. Still working on that church lady, one of them, Martin Gray, teased. "What's next, Ethan? Angels on the ceiling?" Ethan smirked. "If they pay enough, maybe." Another artist leaned over. "You're wasting your skill, Hale. Painting the Virgin Mary? You might as well join the seminary." They laughed. The sound was sharp, hollow. Ethan raised his glass of brandy. "Gentlemen, to the Holy Mother," he said dryly, "the most expensive muse I've ever had." The others chuckled again, but the sound died quickly as he added, "Funny thing, though, every time I paint her, she refuses to look at me." They stared, unsure whether he was joking. He forced a laugh to cover the tremor in his voice. "Must be the lighting." Back in his studio, the unfinished portrait watched him. The Virgin's face was almost complete, her lips soft, her skin luminous, but her eyes remained blank. Every attempt he made to paint them ended in failure. They were either too cold, too human, or too lifeless. He'd scrape the paint off, repaint, and still, they wouldn't come alive. He told himself it was just technique, that he hadn't found the right hue. But deep down, something whispered, "It's not your hands that are blind, it's your heart." And the more he tried, the more his frustration turned to fury. One evening, Evelyn Carter came by unannounced. The room smelled of smoke and turpentine. The floor was littered with discarded sketches, faces half-formed, eyes scratched out, brushstrokes angry and desperate. Evelyn approached quietly. "You've been working hard," she said softly. Ethan didn't look up. "Working, yes. Progressing? No." She stepped closer to the canvas and studied the painting. "Her face is beautiful," she whispered. He gave a bitter laugh. "Beauty isn't the problem. Faith is." Evelyn turned to him. Then why not borrow mine for a while? He stared at her, confused. You don't have to believe, she said gently. Just paint as if you do. Her words hit him harder than any sermon ever could. After she left, he sat in silence, the words echoing inside him. Paint as if you do. He picked up the brush again, hesitantly at first, then faster, his movements driven by a strange urgency. He painted deep into the night, until his hands cramped and his eyes burned. And still, the eyes refused to open. It was past midnight when he finally threw the brush against the wall. You don't exist, he shouted into the empty room. Do you hear me? You're not real. His voice cracked. The words echoed off the plaster, swallowed by the darkness. Then, a sound. Soft at first, like the rustle of fabric. He turned sharply, heart pounding. The lamp flickered, shadows shifting along the walls. The air felt thicker, almost alive. He whispered to himself, get a grip, Hale. You're losing it. But as he turned back toward the easel, something made him freeze. There, on the canvas, a single tear glistened on the Virgin's painted cheek. He blinked. Once. Twice. The tear remained. Ethan stumbled backward, breath caught in his throat. No, that's not possible. He wiped at the spot, and felt the brush of moisture against his finger. A drop of water. Real. Cold. The lamp hissed. The faint scent of roses filled the air. He backed away slowly until his shoulders hit the wall. His pulse thundered in his ears. Stop, he whispered to the empty room. Whatever this is, stop. But it didn't stop. The tears shimmered once more before drying into the paint, leaving behind a faint, pearlescent sheen, as if it had always been part of the artwork. He sank into his chair, trembling, eyes fixed on the face he had mocked and painted 100 times. Who are you? He murmured. What do you want from me? The only answer was silence. By morning, the tear was gone, and he told himself it must have been condensation, a trick of the light, anything but divine. But when Evelyn Carter returned that afternoon, she paused at the doorway, eyes widening. You've changed something, she said quietly. Ethan frowned. No, I haven't touched it since last night. She stepped closer to the canvas, tears welling in her eyes. Then why does she look alive? Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time since he began painting her, he felt it too. The quiet, unshakable feeling that someone was looking back. A week later, Ethan Hale boarded a flight bound for New York. He had been invited to present several of his older works at a private gallery showing, a prestigious event meant to remind the art world that he still existed. He left the painting of the Virgin Mary behind, locked away in his studio. Or at least, he tried to. Because as the plane lifted off the runway and the clouds swallowed the horizon, he realized he couldn't leave her behind at all. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that face, calm, luminous, unearthly, and those eyes that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He pressed his palms over his face, muttering under his breath, it's just a painting. Nothing more. But deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. In the seat beside him, an older man with kind eyes and a clerical collar turned slightly. Rough day, son? He asked. Ethan managed a faint, weary smile. Just tired. The priest chuckled. Aren't we all? You look like someone carrying a lot more than luggage. Ethan turned to the window. You could say that. The priest studied him for a moment. You're an artist, aren't you? Ethan blinked in surprise. How do you know? I've met enough painters in my parish, the priest said, smiling. They all have that same haunted look, as if they've seen beauty and can't decide whether to love it or curse it. Ethan's throat tightened. You sound like someone who paints too. The priest shook his head. No. I just know the one who does. The words lingered between them. Ethan forced a laugh. Let me guess, God. The priest's smile didn't fade. The very same. Hours later, as the flight continued over the Atlantic, turbulence struck. The cabin lights flickered. A nervous murmur rippled through the passengers. Ethan gripped the armrest. He wasn't afraid of flying, or at least, he never had been. But something about the storm outside felt unnatural. Lightning flared. Thunder rolled through the fuselage. The priest beside him whispered a prayer, fingers moving over a small rosary. Ethan tried not to look, but the soft sound of the beads seemed to draw him in, rhythmic, patient, timeless. He remembered Evelyn Carter's words, perhaps she's not looking at something, but for someone. He exhaled shakily. You really think praying changes anything? He asked quietly. The priest turned toward him, voice calm but firm. It doesn't change God. It changes the one who prays. Another flash. The plane jolted violently. Gasps filled the cabin. Ethan's heart pounded. He clenched his fists, and suddenly realized something. His hand had closed around something cold in his jacket pocket. He looked down. The rosary Evelyn had left behind in his studio, the one she used to hang near the lilies. He must have accidentally packed it. He froze. The cross dangled in his palm, reflecting the dim cabin light. The priest noticed. You pray, too? Ethan shook his head quickly. No. It's not mine. The priest smiled faintly. Maybe not yet. The turbulence grew worse. The overhead compartments rattled. A baby began to cry somewhere in the back. Then, a loud crack. The plane dipped sharply, throwing several passengers against their seatbelts. The lights went out. Panic erupted. Ethan's heart slammed in his chest. Through the chaos, he could hear the priest praying aloud now, his voice steady, unwavering. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. The word struck him like a blow. He clutched the rosary tighter. Outside, lightning illuminated the clouds in blinding flashes. For a split second, through the window, Ethan thought he saw something, a faint glow, soft and blue, shaped like a figure, floating beyond the wing. His breath caught. It was impossible. It had to be. He blinked, and the light was gone. But in its place, a strange calm fell over the cabin. The turbulence eased. The lights flickered back on. The priest let out a slow breath. We've been spared, he whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He stared at the rosary in his hand, the silver cross glinting faintly. He turned it over, tracing the small engraved word on the back, Ave. And in that moment, for the first time in his adult life, Ethan whispered a prayer. Not out of habit. Not out of fear. But out of gratitude. When the plane landed safely, passengers applauded and cried. Ethan sat in silence, still holding the rosary. The priest smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, he said softly, it takes a storm to make us look up. Ethan nodded slowly, unable to speak. But deep inside, something fragile, something long buried, began to stir again. That night in his hotel room, sleep wouldn't come. The hum of the city outside only reminded him of the silence within. He took the rosary from his pocket and set it on the nightstand. And when he turned off the lamp, he could have sworn, just for an instant, that the silver beads shimmered in the dark, like drops of light scattered from another world. When Ethan returned to Portland, the city seemed quieter than before, or perhaps he was simply hearing it differently now. The church bells that once annoyed him now sounded less like noise and more like memory, echoing through the cobbled streets as though calling him back to something he had forgotten long ago. His first stop was the studio. The air inside was thick with the familiar scent of oil paint, turpentine, and lilies, though the lilies had long since dried and browned. Dust floated through the light that streamed from the tall windows, dancing like faint halos above the forgotten canvases. He turned toward the Virgin Mary. The painting was exactly where he had left it, standing silently in the center of the room, half-shrouded under a cloth. He hesitated before pulling the fabric away, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. When he did, the sight made him stagger back a step. The colors had changed. The blues were deeper, the white softer, the skin luminous in a way no pigment could have created. He rubbed his eyes, blaming fatigue, travel, anything. But the light on her face wasn't coming from the window, it was coming from within the paint itself. He whispered hoarsely, "What are you?" No answer came. Only silence. But that silence felt alive, like a presence breathing just beyond the edge of sound. Days passed. Ethan told no one. He barely ate, barely slept. Every time he entered the studio, the painting seemed to shift slightly, not in form, but in feeling. The Virgin's eyes now appeared to hold something new, not sorrow, but compassion. And yet, there was a trace of something else. Expectation. He tried to ignore it, focusing on his other commissions. Portraits, landscapes, the mundane work that paid bills. But the moment he picked up a brush, his hand betrayed him. He would start painting a face, only for the outline of Mary's veil to appear. He would sketch a figure, and her eyes would emerge instead. It was as if she was painting through him. He threw his brushes down in frustration. "Enough," he shouted. "You've made your point. Whatever you are, leave me alone." But she didn't. Because the Virgin does not abandon those who unknowingly begin to seek her. That evening, Evelyn Carter returned. Her health had begun to fail, she leaned heavily on her cane, her steps slow. Yet her presence filled the studio with warmth. She gazed at the painting for a long moment, then whispered, "You've seen her, haven't you?" Ethan froze. "What are you talking about?" "The light," she said softly. "It's different now. You didn't paint it, she revealed it." He shook his head, trying to hold on to reason. "You think this is a miracle?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "I don't think. I know." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "I'm losing my mind. I swear I saw her face change. Her eyes are looking at you," Evelyn finished gently. "They've been waiting for you since the first stroke you ever painted." He stared at her, bewildered. "Why me?" "Because you doubted," she said. "And doubt is the first crack where light enters." Her words struck him like lightning. For the first time, Ethan's defenses crumbled. He fell to his knees before the painting, hands trembling. The air grew heavy, thick with something indescribable, not fear, not awe, but both. He whispered, "I mocked you. I painted you without believing." And in that instant, a small gust of air brushed past him, though no window was open. The scent of roses filled the room once again, faint but unmistakable. He lifted his gaze to the Virgin's eyes. For the briefest moment, a soft shimmer passed through them, and he felt it, not as sight, but as presence. Warm. Forgiving. Eternal. Tears welled in his eyes, the same eyes that had once seen only shadows. He reached out, barely touching the lower edge of the canvas, and whispered, "If this is real, show me what I'm supposed to do." No voice answered, but the light in the room seemed to brighten just slightly, spilling across the cracked floorboards, illuminating his scattered sketches, each one of them a face of the Virgin, drawn unknowingly from the beginning. He had been painting her long before he was ever asked to. Evelyn approached, her voice soft but firm. "You must finish it." He turned to her. "It's already finished." She shook her head. "Not until you believe it is." She reached into her bag and placed something on the table, a small silver crucifix, worn smooth by time. "This belonged to my late husband," she said. "He always said art can be prayer if you let your heart hold the brush." Ethan took it, his hands trembling. "Evelyn, I don't know if I can." "You already have," she interrupted with a smile. "The rest will come." She left him there, the studio bathed in quiet golden light. That night, Ethan painted again, not out of duty, not for money, not even for Evelyn. He painted because, for the first time, he wanted to. And as he painted, the tears came freely, tears of release, of repentance, of something reborn. The woman on the canvas was no longer just the Virgin Mary. She was his mother's face, his lost faith, his long-forgotten hope, every unanswered question turned into gentle mercy. And when the final stroke was laid, he fell to his knees, whispering a single word he hadn't spoken in decades. "Amen." When dawn broke, the light entered the studio softly, like a benediction. Dust floated through the morning air, catching the sun in slow, holy motion. Ethan Hale had fallen asleep at his easel, his face streaked with paint and tears. The brush still rested loosely in his hand. Before him stood the finished portrait, the Virgin Mary, radiant and alive, as though her eyes could breathe. She was no longer merely pigment and canvas, she was presence itself. Her gaze was turned slightly upward, her lips parted in something that wasn't quite sorrow, nor joy, but something sacred in between. It was as if she saw beyond the world. When Ethan awoke, for a brief second he didn't recognize his own work. It looked nothing like the sterile drafts he had painted before. This one pulsed with warmth, as though the image itself carried a heart. He whispered hoarsely, "I didn't do this." And yet, every stroke was his. Every line was his. But the soul, that had come from somewhere else. That same morning, Evelyn Carter returned, her breath shallow, her face pale. The doctor had warned her that her heart was failing, but she needed, to see the finished painting. Ethan rushed to help her inside, worried by her frailty. She smiled weakly. "Don't look at me like that, Mr. Hale. I'm closer to heaven now, and that's not something to pity." When her eyes fell upon the painting, she stopped. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Oh," she breathed, her voice trembling. "You found her." Ethan said nothing. He simply watched as she approached the canvas, her wrinkled hand reaching out, trembling just above the Virgin's cheek. "She's beautiful," Evelyn whispered. "You've painted her not as a queen, but as a mother. That's how she really is, the mother who never leaves." Ethan swallowed hard. "Evelyn, something happened while you were gone. I saw." "I know," she interrupted softly. "It was meant for you." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned to him, her eyes shining with peace. "You mocked her, you painted her, and yet she came to you. That's what mercy does, it meets us in our rebellion and turns our defiance into devotion." Her words pierced him deeper than any sermon ever could. Evelyn smiled faintly and looked once more at the Virgin's face. "Promise me something," she said, voice weakening. "When I'm gone, let others see this painting. Let them feel what you felt." "Of course," he said quickly. "But don't speak like that." Her hand rested gently on his arm. "Faith isn't about living forever, Ethan. It's about what lives on after you're gone." Those were her final words before she closed her eyes and breathed her last, standing before the very painting she had prayed for. A few weeks later, news spread like fire. The painting was displayed at St. Anne's Cathedral at the Archbishop's request. Crowds gathered from every corner of Maine. At first, it was curiosity, a famous atheist painter's miraculous depiction of the Virgin. But soon, stories began to emerge. Visitors claimed the painting seemed to change expression, her eyes glistening as though moist with tears, her face subtly luminous, her gaze following those who knelt to pray. One man said he smelled roses though there were none in the church. Another swore his crippled hand began to move again after touching the frame. Skeptics came with cameras and instruments, trying to capture a trick of light, a hidden glaze. But nothing explained the way the painting seemed alive only when one knelt in faith. The newspapers called it the miracle of Portland. The church called it the sign of grace. But Ethan, he called it something else entirely. A second chance. Months passed. The painting was later moved permanently to the cathedral's Marian chapel. Every Sunday, Ethan sat quietly in the back pew, rosary in hand. No one recognized him. He didn't want them to. He wasn't there to be honored, only to listen. To the soft prayers, the muffled sobs, the whispers of hope. And sometimes, when he looked up at the Virgin's face, he swore he could feel Evelyn's presence too, as if she were standing beside Mary, smiling gently, her faith now part of something eternal. Years later, when Ethan Hale's own time came, those who entered his studio found a single unfinished canvas resting on his easel. It wasn't a portrait of a saint, or even a woman. It was a child, eyes full of wonder, hand outstretched toward light. Beneath it, written in his faded handwriting, were the words, "Faith begins where reason ends." The hand that once painted doubt now paints grace. They buried him quietly near the cathedral, no grand ceremony, no marble stone. But on the day of his funeral, witnesses claimed that the morning sun streamed through the chapel window in such a way that the Virgin's painted face seemed to shine brighter than ever before. And for those who stood in awe before her, one truth became clear. It wasn't just a painting. It was a story of disbelief turned into devotion, of mockery transformed into mercy, of an artist who tried to paint God, and found God had been painting him all along.